Good evening. This is Brian Lawrence with IndianPeaksWeather.net, your first source for weather in Nederland, Colorado, and the communities in the Front Range foothills. Just a quick update tonight. Currently here at our house at 8,200 feet, a little bit to the east of Nederland. It's about 35 degrees, quite warm for this time of year. Winds, as you can see, are light from the southwest, 2 miles per hour. Some higher gusts, but only up to about 5 to 6 miles per hour. And taking a look at some of the weather stations around our area on the Weather Underground Wonder Map, you can see it's fairly mild right now down in the plains in Boulder, 55 degrees, mid 50s at 9 o'clock at night in mid February. That's pretty impressive. And in fact, there are a few green blobs on the radar field here. That's not real precipitation, it's actually clear across the region right now. That's just ground clutter. That's where the radar is hitting the mountains and perhaps getting bent back into the ground due to a weak inversion down in the plains. But as you can see, the big story right now is warm temperatures and lack of weather. We're going through a fairly dry spell and mild spell. Looks like it's going to last at least for the next probably 10 to 15 days. And why is this happening? Well, let's take a look at the GFS model here. And this is the forecast. We'll go back a couple frames here to the forecast for Friday morning. And the big story with our neck of the woods and most of the western U.S. right now is that we're under what we call a big warm ridge. And you can see that here. This is midday tomorrow, midday Thursday. And what we're looking at here is the wind flow at about 20,000 feet above sea level. And so this is well above even the highest peaks in Colorado, above the 14,000 foot peaks. And these are contours, these are height contours. So what we're basically looking at here is almost like a topo map. If you're familiar with reading maps when you hike, you're looking at a topo map with the height contours. Well, that's exactly what this map is. It's showing us height contours of the 500 millibar surface, which again is about 20,000 feet, roughly. And where we have these like mountainous features, these ridges, well, that's what we call ridges in the atmosphere. And here, notice how low the heights are, 492. In fact, this is an upper level low circulating over the Hudson Bay. And a general correlation in weather and meteorology with heights. The higher the heights, the warmer the temperatures in the areas under there. So the western U.S. right now is under this ridge here. And the ridge axis goes right about through here. So we're looking at pretty warm temperatures right now across a good part of the Rockies, including the Southern Rockies, Central Rockies, and Northern Rockies, as well as the West Coast, up all the way into Washington and Oregon. Meanwhile, over the eastern U.S., if you remember earlier this winter, it was quite warm in the eastern U.S. Well, that's changed now. It's quite cold. There's a very cold air mass of Arctic air underneath this upper level low, spinning away over the Hudson Bay. And this is a very amplified pattern we're seeing here with the big ridge in the west and a deep low in the east. And these patterns can be very resilient and slow to change. And that's why we're expecting an extended period of warm weather here in Colorado and the Front Range foothills around Nederland, Colorado. Just going to step forward in time a little bit, see how this evolves. And what we're going to see is that eventually this ridge will begin to flatten out a little bit. But it's not going to be for quite a while, actually. As we get into the weekend, we actually have a very nice weekend on tap here in Colorado. When I say nice, well, it's going to be warm. And that can be good or bad because the ski resorts on the other side of the Continental Divide, Warner Park, Breckenridge, Loveland, it's going to get very warm there. We're going to be looking at temperatures in some of those areas in the upper 30s to mid 40s. And if you're a skier, you know what that means. You're going to get melting of snow during the day and refreezing of snow at night. So if you do go skiing, expect scrape and hard pack in the morning, which will begin to soften in the afternoon as the sun hits that snow and the temperatures warm well above freezing. So you can see that this ridge is very resilient, and part of the reason is that this cold air mass here and these very low heights at 500 millibars are going to be very slow to move out of the east. So they're looking at a prolonged period of cold weather in New England all the way down through the mid-Atlantic. But for us, again, very quiet weather. Now, another thing that tends to happen when we get into patterns like this is that the jet stream tends to get shunted well to the north of us when we're under these ridges. So the jet stream in this case would be up in this area here. And you can see we're here. The jet stream drives the storms. It's the mean storm track. So as you can see, most of the storms and the moisture, that's the green blobs here, will be to our north. Again, another reason why we're not going to see too much sensible weather, at least in terms of precipitation or winter precipitation, which it's February, it is winter, we would expect to be seeing some, but instead it's going to feel more like spring. I'm going to take a look at the ECMWF right now. That'll take us out to 10 days. That's about as far as I usually like to go when it comes to forecasting. And here's the ECWF right here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. There we go. And we'll start off with 24 hours. And that'll take us through Thursday morning. And again, very pronounced deep trough over the east. These blue colors here correspond to low heights, but they could also correspond to very cold temperatures because, again, where we have these troughs in the atmosphere, you tend to have cold air masses beneath them, and where you have the ridges, you tend to have warm air masses beneath those. And look at us, look where we are. We're just to the east of this ridge axis here in some weak northwest flow. But again, most of the moisture is being shunted to our north, so even areas to the west of the Continental Divide that tend to be favored in northwest flow in terms of upslope, there's not going to be much precip because there's not much moisture. And moisture is always key when it comes to making weather in the Rocky Mountains. Skipping ahead in time a little bit, this will be Friday, Saturday, and what you do see here by Saturday, that the ridge does get broken down a little bit, but what's actually happening is there is a weak shortwave here. You can see that. You can actually see the little troughiness here that is cutting over the top of the ridge. So if we go on, step on to another day here, this will take us into Sunday morning. That trough, that shortwave is now digging across us, Colorado, and it's beginning to dig out into the plains here, the southern central plains, by Monday morning. And then it cuts off somewhere over the Mississippi River Valley by Tuesday morning. Notice that the ridge begins to build back up across the western U.S., not quite as intense as it was before. Point is that as the shortwave crosses us on Saturday and Sunday, we will see a little bit more probably in the way of clouds, but I'm not expecting a whole lot in the way of precipitation. And again, that's just because there's not a whole lot of moisture around us right now. So again, this is Saturday morning. And as we skip ahead towards Sunday morning, that trough will be cutting across northern Colorado and the central Rockies. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few snow showers in the mountains. Nothing really on the plains. Associated with that trough would be a weak cold front, which will push down south across Colorado, looking something like this as that trough goes through. But it definitely not an Arctic blast by any stretch of the imagination. And again, it's going to be a dry front for the plains. I don't expect anything in the way of precipitation down around Denver or Boulder. But again, in the foothills and especially up along the divide and on the west side of the divide, a little bit of snow, but nothing major, and definitely not enough to freshen up the ski slopes after a week of freezing and thawing, unfortunately. Stepping a little bit further ahead in time, going out to, oh, this would be Tuesday morning, and then Wednesday, Thursday. The pattern becomes at least a little bit more progressive. When I say progressive, that means you can see that these ridges and troughs are now moving at a fairly good clip to the east. So if I go back one day, the trough is here, and we go 24 hours ahead. This trough has moved up here. There's another trough digging into the Pacific Northwest. And if we go into Thursday morning, this trough is now pushing across Sierra Nevada. That's good news because that means that the pattern is beginning to break down. It's becoming a progressive pattern. And when you get progressive patterns, you get a better chance of weather as we head into, this is starting to get a little bit too far out in the future now. And we get into next week, basically a week from now, 8 days from now, you can see that the ridge is gone. There is some troughiness and short waves crossing us there, which means a better chance of precipitation by later next week. And important thing, I like to talk, when we get this far out in the future, I like to talk about trends in terms of precipitation and temperature. Temperatures should be getting back down towards normal now because the ridge is gone. A lot of the warm air is gone. In fact, it's being pushed off into the eastern U.S. now. Here's the ridge there. You can see a pretty deep low across southern Canada, and ahead of it, very strong southerly flow, and that's helping to advect warm air from the Gulf of Mexico, the southern U.S., up into the Great Lakes area. So their deep freeze will be relatively short-lived too. It's going to be colder this weekend, but next week they'll begin to moderate as well. And then finally, 10 days out, well, we're getting into la la land here, as we used to like to call it in weather school. But again, it's a fairly zonal pattern. And you're like, well, what do you mean by that, Brian? Well, let me show you. Zonal. Whereas before we had these big ridges and troughs, remember, when we first started off, now the jet stream and the upper level flow pattern is more just directly west to east. And that's what we call zonal flow. Zonal flow does not tend to bring with it extremes in temperature. So again, I think temperatures will be getting back down towards normal by later next week. So we have 7 days or so of some pretty warm weather. But by later next week, we'll be getting to a more normal pattern in terms of temperatures and precipitation. Well, we got these weak short waves crossing us. May not bring a whole lot of precipitation for the front range, but on the other side, the divide, maybe the mountain areas will begin to start picking up some snow. And one of the things about zonal patterns is that the tap of moisture from the Pacific Ocean becomes a little bit more efficient and direct. Even though you are still crossing a couple mountain ranges in the way, there's still usually enough moisture to create some snows in areas like Winter Park and Steamboat Springs and the northern mountains of Colorado, but not much for the plains, just more seasonable temperatures. All right. So not a very exciting weather pattern for the next week or so. Slight chance of snow later this weekend in Nederland, but I don't think accumulations will amount to much. And taking a look at the weather underground forecast, which I tend to give a lot of weight to, it tends to be pretty decent. You can see that the forecast will look like a little bit like a broken record once it comes up here. And unfortunately, I'm a little ways from the router, so it could take a minute or two for this to show up. But you can see that our conditions right now are very, very nice at 34.5 degrees, basically rounding up to 35 degrees, and pretty dry. Humidity right now, 36%, dew point 10 degrees, and just a really nice break for some of the cold weather we've had this winter, and it's been a pretty cold winter, but it's not that good for the ski areas. either because they like to be picking up some fresh snow, and a lot of ski areas right now aren't making snow. Important thing to note is that it is only February and winter is not over. It is a strong El Nino spring, and what that typically means is that we have an improved chance, a heightened chance of bigger spring storms along the Front Range. And that includes areas down in the plains adjacent to the Front Range foothills, such as Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, and so forth. All right, well, this is not going to come up. I guess that's okay. So I'll go back to my page here, and you can see that Thursday we're looking at temperatures in the mid 40s. I'll probably raise that a little bit up here to the mid to upper 40s because it got quite warm today here in Ned. And Friday sounds a little bit like a broken record. Sunny, lots of sunshine. Never seems to be a shortage of that here in Colorado. Highs again in the upper 40s. Saturday, that should be a great day. Again, temperatures mid upper 40s, lots of sunshine, no precipitation. We do have that trough just grazing northeastern Colorado on Sunday, so with it, it'll bring slightly cooler temperatures, maybe 10 degrees cooler than Saturday. Highs in the mid to upper 30s, lows in the upper 20s, and there will be a chance of snow showers, but it won't amount to much. Sorry, folks, not a big storm. And then sunshine returns on Monday, and temperatures will rebound fairly quickly into the low to mid 40s. And looking ahead to early next week, probably seeing temperatures generally in the low to mid 40s, at least through the end of the week when we start getting into a more interesting weather pattern. But I'll have more on that later. So have a good night, and thank you for joining me, and I'll be talking with you soon.